for how you're going to be obtaining vision throughout the match. If you're Terran, scan. Basic. Engagements. So for the main fights, you want to think about how many units are participating in a given fight. Say it's a Roach versus Roach ZVZ scenario. If there are similar numbers of Roaches, whenever they're kind of colliding with each other, they aren't always all participating at the same time. So if you get into a replay, look at maybe the back part of your army and see if there are any units just running around. Like they're not close enough to participate in the engagement, so you're not getting value for that unit as part of your army. So maybe think about taking the fight somewhere else, or making a better spread of your units. One of the main additions with Legacy of the Void is a bunch of really strong AoE stuff. So you have disruptors, immense AoE damage to ground, like game-ending, game-changing. It's insane how much damage they can deal. So players who have the habit of having their army in a big ball and kind of moving around the map, if you move toward the Protoss base and they send in 2 disruptor shots, game, it's over. So, engagements. Pre-split your units. It's not something you should have to do on the fly, where you have everything all in one big ball. The shots come in and you try to furiously like micro stuff away. Just have your army kind of more spread, like fanned out. And when you move in, if a disruptor shot comes into your army, you can just make a small adjustment and maybe take some losses, but you won't lose your whole army. So really think about not just how to micro in the engagements, but your army formation leading up to the engagements. I'll put that in the notes as well. Consider formation and distracting the opponent's attention away from the main fight so you can be more successful relative to micro. So in the replay, I did a Lurkernitis, which distracted Bubbles, but I didn't capitalize on that by taking an engagement with my main army at the same time. And that ties into directing attention, so I guess I don't need that second one. But formation is very, very important and can be a deciding factor in a lot of battles. Opponents. Adversaries are also humans who share our passion for competitive strategy. They provide opportunity to exercise cognition and teach us of our weaknesses. Be thankful for their participation. There's definitely an attitude of bitterness toward opponents. I would say the Starcraft scene overall is pretty friendly. Like, other people who are talking about builds, hanging out in streams, like, we're pretty cool with each other. But in a fucking ladder game, that motherfucker. Can't believe they would do that build to me. So, remember, your opponent is also a human being, and maybe they like that build. Maybe it's fun for them. And this is a pretty brutal and violent and unforgiving game. So, if you mess up, they should be able to take the victory. Like, that's how war works. Even small mistakes, if they're crucial enough, should net a loss. So be okay with that. Be okay with the opponents who play in a style that maybe you don't really like, maybe you don't admire. It's still useful for making your own play stronger. So we can still be thankful to opponents who are really tough for us to deal with. Manner in BM. So this has to deal with communication with opponents. BM, being rude to the opponent, can potentially net some advantages. If you are really rude to the opponent and you piss them off, kind of like in Monty Python, if you insult them enough they might make a mistake. It's not a reliable technique, so you can't necessarily say that if I'm rude to the opponent they'll mess up and I'll have an advantage. You also have to spend APM to type out words. So in the beginning of the match, you're producing workers, maybe you're doing a little bit of scouting, you can bind your camera location hotkeys. There's not very much time to type in Starcraft games, which is why Starcraft tends to have less lines of BM text than, say, MOBA games, where anytime a player is dead, they just badmanner furiously for like a minute. So there's less, and be very mindful of people who BM against you. If they're talking smack to you, see each keystroke as an opportunity for you to get ahead in your macro. Just keep to your plan, keep practicing, keep training and exercising, let them do their thing, and you can just man her out in a respectful way, as if they were never BM to you in the first place. Because, you know, in the vast majority of cases, if you took someone who's BM on ladder, you put them in a coffee shop next to you, and you're sitting down in chairs, you would be friends, and you would be cool with each other, and you'd be like, dude, like, what the fuck did Blizzard do to ladder? Like, everyone got their bonus pool back? Why was the ladder locked early? It would just be like cool fellowship time with them, and you would get to know each other, maybe practice later, maybe do some team games. There's a lot less of the human interaction when you're only dealing with their units in the game and you don't see their human face, you don't see their human emotion, and kind of their personality. So cheese and all-in, already addressed that. It's tough to lose to cheese and to all-in, but often those identify our areas where we need to improve. So if you die to a cheese, you die to an all-in, you don't know how to deal with it, ask somebody. There are lots of people who, if they were faced with that same attack, they would have defended it easily. So find those people and say, hey, what do? This person did 2 Immortals, Warp Prism, and tons of Zealots. What do I do? There are defensive procedures for dealing with that. So you can go and learn them. And you have to thank those opponents for doing that build to you, because if they never did that build to you, you would never have sought out a solution to that problem. So the next time it would have happened, you would lose again. So stress. Starcraft is very stressful, and the objective of the opponent is basically to stress you out and to overwhelm you and to defeat you mentally and kind of by hand speed and maneuvering. So be okay with that. Like, base race scenarios are incredibly stressful. Both players have armies running all over the damn place. You're trying to build buildings everywhere and not die, trying to keep your workers alive, trying to focus down their structures and keep everything active. It's very, very tough. So accept the fact that StarCraft is stressful, and know that your opponent is also stressed by StarCraft. So it's an opportunity for you to both engage in a high-stress environment and really work on training your brains together. Seeking further practice with the opponent. There are actually a lot of opponents who will trounce you, like totally mop the floor with you, and if you say, hey, like, that was a really good style, would you be open to play some more games sometime? Often they'll say yes. They'll say, okay, sure. Because it feels good to win, so they feel like they might win some more against you. And that will make you a lot better. If you identify a style that you're weak against, and maybe you get some information about how to be more successful against that style, you could play against them again, and again, and again, and again, until you're very well versed in that spot. So an example from my career is dealing with Cannon Rush from Protoss. There was a Protoss in my clan who was very, very good at cannon rushing, and I was very poor at defending cannon rushing. I had no idea what to do, and I would just lose my natural and then be behind and die to a timing attack. So rather than say, fuck this person in particular, I was like, hey, could you cannon rush me sometimes? He said, okay, sure, that's fun. So he would just cannon rush me over and over again in customs, and kind of we would talk about how I could potentially defend, and then play from those scenarios to the point where I'm very comfortable in cannon rushing scenarios now because I've been there so many times. One of the advantages of going for a particular cheese is usually the person who's applying the cheese has more experience in that scenario than the person defending the cheese. So think about each instance as a scenario where you can get some more practice in. It might not be your main preference for how a StarCraft game can play out, but people will force that position upon you, so you might as well learn it. You might as well expand your repertoire and improve the way you execute your style by factoring in defense of those particular cheeses. Cool. That's all of the outline for what we were going to look into. We can do some FAQ. We're over an hour already, so I probably won't go over another replay, but I think this was fairly thorough in terms of addressing like a broad picture of how to improve the way you approach ladder. So questions? Any questions? I will read chat now. I was trying not to read chat so I could have a more kind of continuous stream of thought, be less interrupted. But fire away. Grain by grain, this will be saved as a VOD on the Lycan channel. So I'll probably send it out to my subs, and it will likely get posted to Reddit, like Lycan posted Avalos's episode to Reddit as well. So they'll be pretty easy to find. Oh yeah, I'll paste the outline for anyone who didn't get the notes. Oh, thank you. Super Mahmed. Neuro, how do you stay positive in a loss streak or after a bad throw? So, those will happen. Losing streaks are inevitable, and I kind of like to think of it as, rather than, oh my god, this is so terrible, I'm not happy, I picture it like you're a motherfucking samurai who is engaged in battle, and the battle is upon you. And maybe it starts to rain, and maybe that makes the ground muddy, and it's shitty. But if you are determined, if you kind of maintain focus on your objective and what you're trying to do, you can pass people up in your downswings. There's a really cool scene in Pirates of the Caribbean that's actually been really helpful to me on that front. It's like super rainy and shit on the boat, and Captain Jack Sparrow is like smiling and like steering the ship, and the first mate is like, what the fuck, Johnny Depp? Like, why are you so happy? And he says, we're catching up, because they're making a lot of progress through a storm. The storm is an opportunity to still improve, even though it's uncomfortable. So losing streaks, too, are kind of like the storms of your career. They're not necessarily comfortable and ideal, like you get wet and stinky and smell like a dog, but you can catch up, because a lot of people will rage quit in their losing streaks. They'll kind of write losses off as balance, oh, like, fuck adepts or whatever, rather than saying, no, I'm not playing very well, but this is an opportunity to identify my areas of weakness. Bad throws, I mean, kind of what I touched on before, you're never entitled to victory. Like, just because you're ahead doesn't mean you're going to win. Technically, you could say that every loss is a throw. So, rather than kind of get down on yourself for going from a position of being ahead to being behind, just kind of acknowledge what that error was. Like, maybe you flew your mutas over some marines. You could do a drill where you just do your build on a map, and you're kind of like macroing your bases, you micro your ground army, and then you address your mutas. And you just kind of do that rhythm of bases, army, mutas. So throws, you can say, are tools for identifying what you need to work on later, rather than a point where you really need to get down on yourself. Don't worry about it too much. What army composition do you want in that last Protoss game at the end? Broodlord, Corruptor, Queen, Hydra, Viper is one that I've been going for in general against Protoss in the late game. It's kind of the well-rounded swarm. You want to have a lot of creep that's kind of on their side of the map. If you had a couple of Ultras, maybe 10 Broodlords, 5 Vipers, some Infestors, you have a really, really tough composition for Protoss to deal with. A good place to find builds for a gold player. You don't know exactly what a timing is or what it means to 14 pool or 17 gas. I believe Team Liquid has a lot of builds. So since the new expansion came out, they changed the economy, so all the builds have been changed. Which, like the old places where we got builds, I think imbabuilds.com was one where a lot of people got builds in Heart of the Swarm. Those were all thrown out, pretty much. So, asking around for people, often on Starcraft Reddit, people will be pasting builds. I would definitely encourage you to check out the Team Liquid forums for really great builds and guides. I think if you just search on Team Liquid for builds, you'll get a whole host of information on it. That's a good point, Noxial EDM. versus a very specific build order, you go into the game knowing what the build order is and what's going to happen. So you could potentially metagame, which is sort of a problem in getting the most value from that practice. Like, if you're going into a match and you ask an opponent to do a particular thing, they won't have the element of surprise. So really, it's mainly about internalizing your defensive procedure so that when you're faced with that on the ladder, you have a better sense of what to look for to identify it and how to react in a way that's already been practiced by you multiple times. Yeah, it's all about striking the balance between deliberate practice in customs and ladder games. If you only ever do deliberate practice customs against opponents, often the matches on ladder feel like very crazy and chaotic, and you can never predict or control what's going on. And if you ladder all the time, you never really get to hone in on particular scenarios very much. How do you personally deal with losing a hard loss where you want to rage? The first step is admitting that it pissed you off in some way. Like, there was someone who greed cheesed me on Ruins of Saros. They went 3-hatch before pool and ZVZ, which is a really terrible build to go for because the most popular build on that map is 14-14. So that kind of pissed me off that they took a really ridiculous, greedy risk to get ahead. And I think taking ownership of that and saying that, yeah, that kind of pissed me off, what could I do next time? Basically, my coping strategy was to 14-14 them for the rest of my session. And I got to face them 4 more times and kill them with 14-14 every time. So, just, Starcraft is cool because you can leverage your aggression into your gameplay. You don't need to lash out at people verbally. You don't need to, like, physically harm anyone. You can virtually attack them with Ling Bane. And I feel like that's a really nice release for those emotions. Another thing, like, if I got up to level 8 or 9 angry, I would go for a run. Like, getting some cardio in, pounding that anger into the earth with each step is really good. Thanks, Vatwhale. Yeah, part of my experience with strategy gaming and kind of thinking about gaming comes from poker. I played poker professionally for a year and a half, so reading up on a lot of poker literature, informing my strategy and decision making and how to take edges really expanded my approach to RTS beyond just like going from one video game to another. I went from playing like Han and MOBA games to playing poker and then into Starcraft. What is your advice for overcoming ladder anxiety? I actually wrote an article on that. I will paste the link and then tag you. Ladder anxiety, I feel like the basis for it is loss aversion. At least that's one of the kind of elements that causes us to be hesitant putting in volume. So anytime you are about to push the ladder button, you could potentially lose a game, lose points, lose reputation with that opponent or anyone who's watching you, and just feel worse about your day. So you want to think less about what you could stand to lose and more about what you could stand to gain. So hitting the ladder button, rather than I'm either going to win or lose, it could be a hard game, you could say, I'm going to make some gains. Like, I'm going to play some matches, I'm going to build some stuff, and I'm going to learn. And it's going to be productive, even if I have a downswing. Lots of people experience ladder anxiety. So confronting that gives you a clear edge in your improvement over time. Thinking about practice volume, like the number of reps that you can do, and being aware of how many reps you do. Like, it's not that big of a deal to only be playing 2 or 3 matches, but if you want to play more, just add on 1 more match, like gradually increasing your repetitions of StarCraft performance. What do I do if I can't increase your APM over 100? Increasing APM over 100 isn't very important. You could get Grandmaster with about that much. APM is a resource, but the vast majority of players will be spamming about like 60 to 80 of their APM. So maybe think about really APM efficient styles that are more defensive in nature, where you create a really good composition rather than trying to be outmaneuvering the opponent by attacking in multiple places at once. Find a style that suits you. That's a really key element. how far do my meta skills expect to carry me? Do I expect top players to eventually adopt my methods? So my goal in the scene is basically to improve the mentality of gamers in general. So not all pro players in particular, but there are definitely pro players who are becoming aware of kind of this set of ideas and taking them into consideration. I've done mentality coaching for some pro gamers, which is basically like I'm only addressing how they think about scenarios and how to manage their emotion and motivation. I'm not teaching them Zerg because I have a lot less Starcraft experience than someone like Naniwa or any high-level player. I've only been playing Starcraft full-time since Heart of the Swarm, so I'm quite new. How do you deal with the loss of momentum in a game? You have a hard time regaining map presence when a Terran player starts chain dropping you. You have a hard time punishing anything the Terran is doing while dealing with 2 or 3 drops at the same time. So usually the key for kind of having map presence is overlord speed and overlord spread and creep spread. The more you expand your vision, the more opportunities you create to notice the incoming forms of aggression. So if they're like multi-dropping you, but you have a line of overlords cutting the map in half, I actually learned that from watching Destiny stream, he would have a very deliberate line that just cut the map in half, where he would fill all that vision, and any medivac would cross through the vision of some overlord. So maybe work on that for any given map. Think about your territory, the opponent territory, and then cut a line with overlords or lings. Just some way of filling vision, because the earlier you see a drop, the earlier you can put units in position to deal with it. Wondering how I personally improved on simple mechanics like hitting injects. There's an arcade game called Just Another Queen Inject Test. I'll tag you. I did this for an extended period of time when I switched to the core hotkey layout. It's basically just a couple of hatcheries on an empty plane. It's not even a map, and queens to inject them. And I practiced camera location hotkeys and injecting. And I did that for hours when I was first switching my hotkey layout. And then nowadays I'll sometimes do it for like 10 minutes at the beginning of my session. Not always. Sometimes I'll just do a game on one of the ladder maps and just saturate my bases and max out with an army. That's a really good exercise too. Before you dive into ladder games where opponents are harassing you, just play in an empty custom and try and get to 200 supply with whatever army composition you plan for in some matchup. Top 5 Terrans. To be honest, I don't really follow the pro scene that closely, so you probably know better than me. This is a Q&A. I'll post the notes again. We basically concluded the session already. This is just Q&A after it. The VOD for this will be posted tomorrow. You want to play an aggressive style but always end up playing passive. Any tips to change that, or what race style is better to play passive with? You can play passive or aggressive with any of the races. It's a really widespread misconception in StarCraft that Terran is the aggressive race, Zerg is the defensive race, or Protoss is the defensive race. In Legacy of the Void, there are so many opportunities to play aggressive with all the races, and so many ways to play defensive with all the races, that really just finding a style that fits you. So I would say, what race do you play? If you play whatever race, you don't need to change races if you want to play aggressive. You just need to find an aggressive build that's effective in Legacy of the Void. A lot of the aggressive builds in Heart of the Swarm aren't quite as good in Legacy because everyone got more tools. So sometimes there are more defensive tools to deal with the old cheeses. So there are new cheeses that involve the new tools. So maybe something like big roach attacks against Terran. In Heart of the Swarm, if you made 30 roaches against Terran and they didn't scout it effectively, they just die and you just win the game. Nowadays with Liberators and a lot of Banshee openers, tank drops, Roach pushes really aren't as good as they used to be, but Ravager pushes are really good. It's kind of like finding out the new era of aggressive styles in Legacy of the Void. They're definitely there. What do I do if I've got stuck in a league season after season? I would say getting coaching is the easiest way to bump yourself up some leagues. Any given player is going to be making like very clear errors that if you get someone who's like a league or two above you, they'll be able to see the difference between your play and their play and help you out. There are a lot of really nice, generous people in the community who are willing to just look over a game with you. They don't need to be a streamer, they don't need to be a pro gamer, you don't need to pay for coaching necessarily. A lot of people just really enjoy sharing their game knowledge, so finding one of the thousands of Masters players or Diamond players to look over some of your games and help you out. Well, Avalo got more than triple viewers. Good on Avalo. He's a very successful individual. I'm very happy for his proliferation in this scene. Do you believe in plateaus when you're trying to get better at something? Yes, plateaus happen, but you would think about plateaus as being part of the upward trend of improvement. If you commit to the path of mastery, if you commit to progress, your progress will look kind of like this, where you have upswings, downswings, plateau, up, down. Gradually, you want your overall trend to be in the upward direction, but for any given session or any given week, you could go down, or you could go up, or you could break even. For me, I was in Masters for the first month and a half of Legacy of the Void. During the beta, I was just playing lazy. Like, I was trying random builds. My fundamentals slipped a lot, my scouting was really weak. I wasn't thinking very hard about what my opponents were doing. So, really challenging yourself to look at what your main mistakes are, and maybe getting some oversight from some coach or mentor and saying, hey, what can I be doing better? How are you approaching these scenarios? Narrow down the range of what's causing you to lose, and really put that in front of you, and as you confront the different parts of the game that cause you to struggle, the more successful you'll be. It's just about raising those win rates. So look at the lowest matchup win rate and say, how can I play this matchup better? Who can I practice against? Who will help teach me this matchup? What about Starcraft do you find the most fun? I really like that it's a constant mechanical exercise as well. I played viola for 7 years, and there's tons of overlap in just the hand dexterity, precision, and accuracy of playing a musical instrument and playing Starcraft. The difference is, when you're playing music, unless it's like jazz or something, often you're just following music and you're following a pre-prescribed pattern. But Starcraft is more like fighting, where if someone strikes at you, you need to either block them or counter them in some way. You need to really adjust your plan strongly. You can't just follow the same pattern every time necessarily. Recommendations for dealing mentally with coming back to Starcraft from a break. It can be mentally difficult when your mechanics are further below your expectations after a break. Yeah, that's about being rusty, and I definitely experienced that. So I visited my family for about 2 months last year, and when I came back, definitely, I know the feels. It doesn't feel very good. So I kind of visualized it as you're a musician, you're a fighter, you're a strategist with a repertoire, but whenever you're not practicing, you have some like rust build up on that. The first, say, give yourself 2 to 3 weeks to just dust off the rust. Just clean it up and kind of get back to where you were, because as soon as that happens, you'll start to refine yourself and you'll be getting better. So it's just kind of like getting back up to speed. Be compassionate with yourself, be patient, be forgiving, and have fun. Like, you can have fun even when you're not playing your best. So find styles that you find amusing or enjoying in some way, and criteria for moral victory. Like, we talked about creating deliberate emphasis for a session. Mine lately has been put a Ling outside the opponent's base. And when I would do that on stream, I would say, alright, the Ling is outside the opponent's base. Moral victory. I've won. That's great. And I would feel good that I'm making progress, even though, like, that doesn't kill the opponent. You almost always find yourself overestimating your opponent. It makes you defensive. You rarely have the balls to attack. What's a good way to approach this issue? It's all in. A good way to build confidence as an attacker is to attack them. Just attack them. It's not going to work all the time, but by finding an aggressive build that's pretty effective, like high-level players are using it, so it's mostly a good build, just attack people. As you attack people more and more, you'll kind of recognize that other people have some openings in their play, and they don't know how to defend certain stuff, and you can enter into the scenarios where you're trying to strike at the opponent, find their weakness, and deal damage and kind of pick them apart. If you only ever defend, you can't really get in a lot of practice when you're on the front foot. So you can think about it like you can have a front foot strategy or a back foot strategy. The back foot strategy is when you kind of lean back and you wait for the opponent to come to you. You're kind of macroing up and teching up and you're like, alright, come at me. And then they attack you, you try to take an engagement and then push back. So pushing back will eventually put you on the front foot, which is a different scenario where you're not waiting, you're applying damage and you're trying to beat them. So by just doing some aggressive builds some of the time, that will round off your play quite a bit, and you'll have very clear moments when you're trying to deal damage. I was about to look up the game Viola. It's a good game, dude. Is there any particular question you wish someone would ask on stream? Not really. I don't really like wishing for things. I would be really happy if even one person benefited from this information in a way that made them more calm and collected in their latter games. Like, that's a victory condition, basically. It'll be a VOD too, so for anyone who didn't see the whole thing, you can check it out later. How many builds do you think a casual player should memorize? 1 per matchup? Ah, Noxio, well said. Advice on how to improve keybinds, control groups, and less reliance on F2. So, mastery of mechanics is sort of its own path and process. I didn't delve into it with this session because I didn't think there would be enough time, and there really isn't. But there are a lot of really cool kind of pre-prescribed hotkey layouts that you could try. There's grid, there's the core, and there are probably quite a few more hotkey layouts that are already kind of optimized. Another way you could do it is kind of a pen and paper approach of you have 10 control group slots. What race do you play? What are your production facilities? Bind those to 1 key. What's your main army? Bind that to 1 key, like assign that group. What's maybe a finesse group? You could bind a finesse group, maybe a mutaflock or a group of phoenixes, bind that to a hotkey. What about maybe a caster group? Maybe some High Templar or some Vipers. Assign that to a hotkey. And create some consistency in the way you manage your hotkeys, so you have the same units in that group every time. Basically, you would change F2 to be one of those hotkeys, just a main army hotkey, and you would double tap that main army hotkey to get to your army rather than pressing F2 every time. F2 is kind of like the training wheels that Blizzard put in the game to make it easier for new players to get all of their stuff, basically, and make it a little bit easier mechanically. But as you improve, it's a function that you would want to use less and less, because success in Starcraft is often about using large and small forces and using different types of units, which F2, if you're only using F2, it'll be really hard to add on to that. The most important thing I overcome to become Grandmaster? I think humility, being able to humble yourself and ask for help, and to admit when you're wrong, is really crucial to having a quick transition from Master to Grandmaster. There were a lot of other Master players who were at my same level, who are still in Master League, largely because they feel like they figured out the game, and they feel like they already deserve to be Grandmaster, rather than actively getting coached and seeking help. I've received a lot of coaching from Fatal Bunny, Juno, Talea, Pig, Betrayus. So being open to other people, kind of picking apart